The two worlds of Kensington and Chelsea. The leafy streets of the UK's richest borough, but now looming over them, Grenfell. In the wake of the tragedy, there are questions about whether the disaster could have been prevented by the council and the tenant management organisation, the company that runs the borough's social housing. In a borough where open-air opera is subsidised by the council, residents complain of years of mismanagement, excessive fees and a culture of snobbery. In our investigation, we look at whether the TMO was up to the job and whether it was overpaid. We examine the cosy relationship with the council and the austerity measures that further squeeze social housing, as well as the sky-high interest payments demanded by Treasury. Did all these pressures together lay the path to Grenfell?
These organisations are falling apart. The people are not able to do the jobs they're meant to do. They quite often couldn't explain to you what fire regulations or building regulations are. You've got individual housing officers looking after 10 blocks. It's impossible.
In Kensington and Chelsea, the income from social housing is quite straightforward. They get £58 million in rent from tenants and from housing benefit. But what happens on the spending side? That's more complicated, because a lot of it seems to just float away. There's £14.5 million in management fees. Then there's £13 million that gets taken up by capital charges. That's mostly an interest bill. And what you're left with is just £19 million. That's just £1 in £3 spent on maintenance and repairs for social housing stock. Perhaps that's why David Keir's entire block had scaffolding standing idle for over a year. Now he tells his local MP he wants the TMO to be taken off the council's payroll.
We got a letter, the single letter, the only letter we got from the TMO, explaining to us that the painting and decorating company, the contractors, had gone bankrupt. And the scaffolding stayed up for over a year. So a lot of very, very annoyed residents who felt that the TMO simply weren't listening. TMO is not an accountable or transparent body. It really should be taken back into the council.
Emma Dent-Coad is Kensington's newly elected Labour MP, but she used to be on the board of the TMO and a local councillor at the borough.
The council is supposed to oversee the work of the TMO. The way they treat tenants is an absolute disgrace.
Just bumping into local residents, it doesn't take long for her to hear their worries.
But they don't really reflect the people that live in this part of Kensington. That's something I've noticed. They seem too far removed from how people live here.
She says the TMO's management was chaotic.
It was really, really dysfunctional. It was really appalling, actually. I mean, often the board meetings would end up in total disarray, to put it politely.
They're so bad at managing this property. Why are they still there?
Well, it's because they've been allowed to be there, and that's down to the council. The council has responsibility for that. It is their property, and their properties are being mismanaged by the TMO, and have been for many, many years. I saw a real disdain for people lower down the social orders. I never want to see that in the council again.
Do you think Grenfell could have been avoided?
Of course it could have been avoided. It could have been avoided. It should have been avoided, but it certainly was preventable.
There's also controversy over cost. In Kensington and Chelsea, the TMO fee alone is £10.8 million. But the council charges an extra £3.7 million against its housing income to effectively manage the TMO, taking the total to £14.5 million. That means that in Kensington and Chelsea, the management cost per social home is £1,536. But in nearby Camden, where there is no TMO, it costs £801 per social home. Of course, different councils inherit widely varying stock that make it hard to do a like-for-like comparison. But it seems there's no longer a national body keeping an eye on things. And what's the view over there then? Eamon McGoldrick represents the large management groups that look after council housing. You've gone from a situation where there was an overall body looking at TMOs nationally to one where there's no regulator.
There's certainly been a reduction in regulation, and I think we're also seeing
at the moment... But there's no regulator, is there?
The ultimate regulator is the democratic elected body, which is the council. Ultimately, if services aren't good and not delivered well, then it's through the ballot box and through democratic process.
Surely you must acknowledge that residents would think it's strange there's no national regulator.
Sometimes the Audit Commission, for example, with arm's length management organisations, did give a degree of comfort by doing an on-site inspection every 2 or 3 years, by doing an in-depth look at the organisation.
But why did that disappear?
Well, government, as part of their, I think it was a time when they thought there was a lot of quangos. Remember that thing, make these quangos toast? There was actually a drive by the coalition government to actually remove a lot of these quangos and inspection regimes.
In the aftermath of the Grenfell disaster, the TMO's chief executive, Robert Black, resigned amid questions about the responsibility for the fire and anger about his 6-figure salary. The organisation says it has a 90% approval rating amongst its tenants, but legal papers show it's been dogged by controversies for almost a decade. In 2009, there were so many complaints by residents that an external legal expert was brought in to investigate the TMO. This document shows that there were 33 areas of concern, including a corporate governance breach where the TMO was instructed that board members should not abuse their position. The minutes of the TMO and the council show an emphasis on saving money and maximising rental income. In one of the many examples, in 2012 they planned £1 million of spending on Grenfell, but in the end only used £376,000. The following year, fire alarms, rewiring works and estate lighting have a combined underspend of £336,000. However, minutes also show pressure on raising rents from tenants, with a 2014 discussion about increasing an extra £7 million in rental income, a 27% hike over 5 years. The defenders would argue that this is prudent housekeeping. Those at the council, who were there at the meetings but didn't want to be filmed, told me that Kensington and Chelsea is not a scrimp and save council. They were simply responding to changes imposed by central government that meant they had less rent and less flexibility. According to this insider, they're a traditional and paternalistic council interested in protecting the poorest in society. The issue, they say, is that in 2015, everything was turned on its head.
We took difficult decisions
in his budget that year. George Osborne announced cuts to social rents of 1% a year. In real money, this small shift cost many councils hundreds of millions of pounds. According to the local government authority, which represents 350 councils, a £5.8 billion black hole emerged. The LGA says that as a direct result of housing money drying up, 120,540 more children and their families are now in temporary accommodation. For the borough, the Osborne changes have meant an £87 million black hole in the next 5 years. The pressure created by these policy shifts are being exaggerated by loan payments owed to Treasury. At Kensington and Chelsea, the interest in these debts is sometimes as high as almost 10%. These abstract numbers translate into real strains for the tenants who live here.
We know that we can't even get repairs and maintenance jobs done without threatening people with court action. So do you think that fire safety is going to be a priority for those people? It should be, but it isn't. And we find that is the case. It's way down the list. You have to complain, you have to threaten court action, you have to go to the press quite often to get the least thing done.
For Pat Mason, the problem starts with central government's obsession with deregulation.
And it's a systemic problem. If the government doesn't think it's important, why should these people? They'll just hire another lawyer or another consultant to prove that what you've just said is unsafe is safe. And that happens every day. You want a friendly consultant? I'll do the job for you. Give me 10 grand. You know, we need to get back to a prescriptive fire safety and building regulations. You want to build a building, this is exactly what you will do.
The TMO told us it is
cooperating fully with all investigations.
And it was
Determined not to do anything that may get in the way of these investigations or delay the authorities from getting the answers and recommendations that mean these tragic events are never repeated.
Tonight, the council's new leader has told us they're working on a deal with central government to allow Kensington and Chelsea to keep more money from right-to-buy sales and the freedom to borrow extra money for housing. Perhaps some comfort for tenants then, if it's a recognition that a lot more needs to be done by local and central government for social housing.